What's up, FJ Nation? You're listening to Forum Junkies, the program that promotes your anguish and feeds on your sweet, delicious tears. I'm your host, Spiritus. Joining us this week as a special guest host, Slayer of Pixelated Dragons, Jack of all trades, Master of all, Huck. And joining me as always, the ferocious feral, the bear that bears all, the man who put the rage into the rage bar, Darksend. On this week's episode, we'll be highlighting interesting posts made on WoW forums from across the internet, and subjects including, should WoW be more real? Lack of content for max-level characters in Cataclysm? How well would WoW do if launched today? And the motivation for playing. But first, I want to invite you to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/forumjunkies. Follow us on Twitter at forumjunkies, all one word. Add us on Google+, and sub to Forum Junkies on iTunes. Also, if you've read a post and you'd like it discussed or have any general comments or suggestions, send us an email at forumjunkieswebcast@gmail.com. Again, that's forumjunkieswebcast@gmail.com. Joining us as a guest host this week is Huck, a member of FJ Nation and a webcasting veteran. Welcome.
Hello, how you doing?
So let's get into our post. The first post we're highlighting today comes from Torpédø from the official forums, who writes about bringing more real elements into WoW. Torpédø writes, quote, I think Blizzard should make WoW a little more real, like creating jobs that we could do like blacksmithing. Let us actually go on quests and stuff to run our businesses. Also, I think they should let us buy houses. That would be really cool. And they should let us choose if we want to be good or bad. For instance, if we want to be bad, we could go into cities and pickpocket people or steal monies or items from stores and kill guards. And if we want to be good, we could help the guards by stopping the ones who want to be bad, and the ones who want to be good can also do good deeds, like helping a fellow WoW player or go on mini-quests that help the shopkeepers. That's what I was thinking for WoW. That would be pretty cool. Hope they consider my idea. I bet it would bring a lot of WoW players back. Again, that was Torpédø from the official forums. Now, I'm not certain if this would make WoW more real, per se, but it would certainly shake things up. First of all, I like the idea of crafting being a larger part of the metagame, where, for example, being a blacksmith is more than a couple of extra gem slots and armor enchants. Being able to ID yourself as a, quote, blacksmith first and a warrior second would bring a great deal of depth for the more casual, at least in my opinion. Second is player housing. This idea has really been beaten to death. And honestly, I don't think Blizzard is willing to put the development effort into doing it well, but you're welcome to comment on it if you'd like. And lastly is the idea of good and bad. It's interesting, and it certainly brings the RP back into MMORPG, but I'm not certain what sort of effort something like this would take. And honestly, I'm a bit concerned it would just end up being like a Scryer Aldor rep grind in its final implementation. What are your thoughts? Any ideas to make WoW more real?
I'm definitely down with The Sims, and maybe implementing that into WoW would bring about something that was a little bit more than just the raiding and the PvP. Whenever you talk about implementing something besides those two, the community kind of sits back and goes, is this what we want? And I actually do believe, being a blacksmith or an herbalist or something like that, it's actually more than just, flying in a circle and picking up flowers. Mm-hmm. Or hammering something for 2 seconds and getting a, very pretty new little shield or something. To actually each profession take on a life of its own would possibly something that fills the gap in time between raiding and PvP.
This goes back to the concept of solo play, and I think one way to really sum up what this guy's asking for is dynamic dailies. Mm-hmm. And I've said this a lot of times. The game has progressed so far from where it once was that if they had done something like this back in vanilla, it would have kept people's attention. But now, if they tried putting it in, people will just ask, what's the point? That's wasting development time away from the meat of the game, which is the raid content. The mentality of the players has changed so much over the years that every good idea can basically be shut down with either it's taking development time away from the meat, which you should be using my $15 a month to develop, which is the raid content, which is what I really play for. Or, I mean, it's not a rep grind, so it's basically giving you gold, which is so abundant nowadays. Who would do it? Do people really need gold that desperately that they do it? They would have to be fun, but even with a dynamic daily system, after a month or two, you'd see the same dynamic daily 4 times
Right.
in 2 months, and you'd be like, well, whatever. They'd have to develop a new quest every single day to keep people from just getting bored out of their minds again.
Yeah,
and it goes back to the beginning.
I guess it's true, but I mean, besides the houses thing, which again is just standard fare for the forums, the crafting thing is interesting. What kind of strikes me the most is like the good and bad deeds thing. I kind of feels a little bit like maybe like a battleground for the non-PvPer. You know what I mean? Like it would be dynamic in the fact that you would battle, quote, back and forth between the good and bad, but it would be done through doing quests and doing, things in a certain area. Like I kind of think that's kind of a bit interesting. It would be like node capturing, but instead of you capturing nodes by, killing other people and standing on it, you would do it by doing quests that would, this place has been, pickpocketed, or this place has been ravaged by, thieves, and now I need to come in and do this. Kind of like how the things worked in Hellfire, the arena stadiums, where you would like sit on them and turn them over, but more dynamic than that. We actually would do something rather than just sit there and wait for the flag to turn.
Well, I think it's Guild Wars is having a system where monsters can take over NPC towns, and depending on how many people you have in the zone, and like it's a dynamic world where if you don't defend that town, a week later people won't be able to quest there,
right?
And you actually physically have to take it back. When I read that about Guild Wars, I thought that's a really interesting idea, and what you just said, I hadn't even thought about that until I heard what you just said. But a system like that would be really good, although of course someone already beat them to it.
Rift.
I have no experience with Rift, but
as somebody like who actually did a podcast for a little while for Rift, and somebody who actually played it to max level and did some rating, I must say that there's a very delicate balance that needs to be struck when it comes to whenever you're talking about node capturing and whenever you're talking about NPCs taking over zones. Because what happened in Rift, and this was the plight of Rift, and I will say is the foundation of why it wasn't as good as everyone anticipated. I'm not going to say it was a flop. It's got a good player base, but not as good as what everyone was expecting. And what it was is, whenever I go to bed at 2 a.m, I wake up the next day, go to work or whatever, or I get on before I go to work, the entire zone I'm questing in has been overrun. And now I have to wait until the maximum play time around 6, whether it be Eastern, Central, whatever, just so I can get enough high levels to go kill everything so I can continue doing things in that area.
Okay, well, our next topic ties a bit into the previous post, but honestly, this has been pretty much the theme of the forums over the last few weeks, and that is there a lack of content for max level characters in Cataclysm? Irritated from the official forums made this post on the topic. Irritated writes, quote, I really hope in the future there will be alternative paths that we can take to continually improve our characters. Never in another expansion did I run out of things to do. I want to log in and be excited about something that I can work toward. Right now, it's frustrating because the only way to improve is Valor points. We are limited with how many we can get a week, which stifles character progression because there are no other ways to advance characters. I know MMORPGs need timed syncs in order to keep people subscribed, but I also believe that attrition happens when people feel like there's nothing else to do. This is a game we all pay for monthly, so Blizzard can create dynamic content.
Hey, look at that!
This is the most successful MMORPG of all time, but currently it doesn't feel like it. The coffers at Blizzard are overflowing. Can you guys start reinvesting in the game? Again, that was Irritated from the official forums. I'll say right off the bat that this is a bit of a QQ post, but the point made here is sound. There really hasn't been any new way to advance your characters since what? Like TBC? I mean, I suppose you could count achievement points, rated BGs, and archaeology, I guess you could consider as new progression. But in earnest, you have PvP ranking, PvE progression, crafting, and collecting, like pets, mounts, and etc. Is Irritated right? Has Cataclysm stifled character progression? Has Blizzard shirked reinvestment into the game in lieu of the tried and true?
Well, this is a problem Blizzard backed themselves into a corner with. The people that are quitting the game are the people who in past expansions had been on, say, SSCTK while a guild like mine was in Sunwell going, hey, I want to be in Sunwell too while they're in Sunwell. So what Blizzard did is make past content, even within that current expansion, no longer relevant. The reason you didn't run out of content in the past is during original Nax, you still had AQ, you still had 20-mans, you still had Blackwing, and even MC was still considered good gear. Same with Burning Crusade, but that was more of a forced system through attunements. Once you got into Wrath of the Lich King, though, once Ulduar came out, there was still some reason to go back. Because of the way item level worked, the stuff off KT was higher item level than the rest of the instance, so it was equivalent to Ulduar. And Malagos and hard mode Sarth were the same item level. But once you got into Trial, there was very little reason to go back to Ulduar unless you were doing hard modes, item level wise. And then once you got into ICC, there was no reason to do anything but ICC. Just the way the game is progressing, if you can't go back and do old content because it's no longer relevant even within that old expansion, it just cuts down on the replayability. And that's why those people are leaving, because it got to that point where people were saying, I want to beat all the content, but then they beat all the content before new content was in, and they quit the game. So Blizzard made that old content even easier? That doesn't make sense. They should have made it harder so they didn't finish by the time the next content came out, thus, keeping them interested.
Don't you think, though, by making old content harder, you're just shooting a dead horse? The way I kind of look at it is, I don't necessarily agree with them nerfing the current content once the new content comes out. My take on it is that the dynamic solo content, I think, is one way that they should go about this. I don't know if you guys have played this, but there's a game out there called The Witcher 2. It's amazing. You should buy it. And it has an option in the game to do night quest, which during the day, you can do whatever you want, but whenever the night comes around, you can do quests soloing content, kind of like you feel in Diablo, where you can solo some stuff. I think that if Blizzard were to implement something such as this, where you can go back and solo old content, not necessarily saying I should be able to go solo Cho'Gall right now, but possibly something in the past, like let's say Ulduar or something like that, not solo for great gear or anything like that, but have a feeling to where you're able to go do something by yourself, would kind of go back to what we said in the first question, where you would feel as though you were doing something outside of just waiting for BGQs.
But, I mean, we're talking about an alternative path here for improving your character. I don't necessarily think that going back and doing old content is necessarily improving your character at max level. I see it more as things that you can do at max level that is actually beneficial to what you want to do at max level, rather than going back and doing something previously. And I get what Darksend is saying about
basically
about
there's
content.
no carrot is the problem right now.
And I see what Darksend's saying about the content, but really, if you want to make current content more relevant, like current content as far as like that expansion, more relevant to more players, you need to make it so that you have to do that content in order for it to be relevant. And right now, if you have a new tier, you just don't need to do previous content to go into next content, because you can get gear via the point system, which, by the way, definitely makes it easier to get into the current content, which is absolutely their design. Like, so there's no problem with their design. It's doing exactly what they want it to do. The question is that making it better for the player who sits there and goes, there's nothing to do because I've already reached everything I can do as a player at my skill level?
Blizzard, just like Darksend said, Darksend put it perfectly. Blizzard has backed themselves into a corner, because as soon as you start talking about adding new current content, the whole argument of they want to push content faster goes out the window. Although we already kind of see it going in that direction, it even goes out further. They've pointed out they want to have more frequent patches and more frequent expansions. The problem comes down to, if they spend that much more time creating solo content, that just wouldn't happen. But at the same time, dynamic solo content, by revamping or reworking older content or adding new areas, new instances that are soloable out of the old, would not only allow a nostalgic feeling, but possibly even help with the new transmogrification coming up.
Well, I'm going to put my game developer hat on for a minute, and thinking like a developer, I'm going to say, have you experienced all the content I, as a developer, have worked on? And I can honestly say, I have not leveled in the new world from 1 to 60. And Blizzard is probably feeling a little pissed off that they put all this work into, from a developer standpoint, they put all this work into the 1 to 60 content, and no one is doing it and saying there's no content.
Oh yeah, no. That's absolutely true. Like when Blizzard
but did they
talks
expect
about
people to do that when they already had max level characters?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think the developers definitely see the revamped old world 1 through 60 as part of this massive amount of content that they put in the game. And it was massive. Like that, if anyone's ever leveled a character 1 through 60 in Cataclysm, it's truly remarkable.
You have to do 3 or 4 characters to get through it all. I haven't done it since alpha, but
the thing is that they expected people to go, oh wow, here's all this new content to experience. But people don't want to roll a new character just to experience content, and it's really not very satisfying to go and doing it as level 85.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So yeah, I think you're right that they've spent a whole lot of development effort in Cataclysm on this the 1 through 60 experience, but no one wants to do it because they see it as, going back rather than going forward.
And Blizzard's mad that people's not doing the stuff they already have in the game.
Right.
It's kind of like adding a spoiler on a 1982 Volkswagen. It's cool to think that that'll make it hip again, but everybody just looks at it as a 1982 Volkswagen. Well,
okay. Well, next topic is on whether WoW would be as successful if it were launched today. Probert from MMO Champion writes, quote, WoW's subscription numbers are heavily built upon A, habit, B, an invested player base who have 5+ years of character history and achievements, and C, brand name recognition. If WoW was to launch today as is, I'm not sure it would get rave reviews or be able to recapture its user base. Even with the streamlined 1 through 60 content, the leveling content and questing is pretty crap, and I'd argue the lore has gotten worse. The endgame is basically arena/rated battlegrounds or raiding. It's got less going on for max level characters than Lotro or Rift as an example. And for the subscription fee, you're basically getting a mini patch of content every 6 months based on the current release rate. Again, that's Probert from MMO Champion. I kind of like this as a thought exercise, and there's really a theme going on here on this episode, but I'm not really certain what to think on this particular question. First, I personally disagree with one statement. I actually think the 1 through 60 content is pretty darn good, and it connects players to the lore far better than ever before. But that really doesn't attest to the overall, how good the lore is now as it was in the past. But I will say that the pacing is all foobar, because you out-level the zone faster than you complete the story arc, and that's just bad. But I'm also uncertain if the claim of Lotro or Rift having more going on at max level, so maybe one of you have better insight on that. But for the sake of discussion, let me put it like this. Let's say there hasn't been a dominant MMO since 2004, and WoW launched today with Cataclysm as, quote, vanilla, sans TBC and Wrath. 60 was max level, and tier 11 was instead tier 1. But it would still have all the stuff that had been developed, like RPGs, Arena, RDF, etc. And I'd even throw in a graphics update for fairness sake. Would WoW have captured a similar market dominance in this scenario?
I honestly don't think so, because I know I'm in the minority here when I say this, but WoW has taken such a backstep since the Burning Crusade. If it had, let's say that right now the Burning Crusade was ending and neither Lich King or Cataclysm existed, and both of those expansions were something completely different, and they didn't make the major backsteps that they made, but still adding in, some of the better, if Rated Battlegrounds had been around since the beginning, that's one thing. But I hate the random dungeon finder. I blame it for a lot of WoW's problem. But if the game had launched with it, the people that log in and only have an hour to play, they need that. And if the game had launched with that, I don't think it would have taken. I mean, WoW was big right away, but that was also in a time when there was no WoW before it that had 12 million players. You know, 1 million players was, oh my God, this is bigger than every other game out there combined.
Right.
So I think it would have gotten to that, 11, 12, 13 million players a lot faster if it had some of those things. But if it had been released alongside with Rift and Star Wars and, Guild Wars 2 and some of those other games, I think players would have been, which game suits me best? Do I have, 1 hour to log in and that's it? Then maybe they would have picked WoW. Do I like PvP? They might have never even touched WoW if, it released at the same time as Guild Wars 2. Am I a hardcore raider? Like different demographics.
Right.
If games would have been tailored differently to different demographics, I feel like.
So basically making the argument that the reason for WoW's success, I mean, besides the fact that obviously it is a well-made game, is the reason for its massive success was the sheer lack of competition at the time.
Pretty much.
I definitely agree with that statement. I think he's even hitting on what I personally think. This question is a paradox, because every game that has come out since WoW has been released has been compared to WoW, and quite arguably has been designed around the core features of WoW itself. Mm-hmm. Whenever you look at a new game coming out, let's just put this question on hold. Whenever you I'm just going to say it, Sweater coming out, Star Wars: The Old Republic. Whenever you see pictures of gameplay, you immediately look for things that because you've played games like World of Warcraft.
But that's also, let's not forget that when WoW came out, you still had EQ. Like EQ was in its decline, but that was the game that everyone compared WoW to, was EQ. And that was the yardstick at the time.
Well, you had EQ, Final Fantasy XI, Dark Age of Camelot, and
Fantasy XI.
You had Final Fantasy XI, Dark Age of Camelot, Lineage 2, and EQ were the current games.
Mm-hmm.
And EQ is definitely the dominant of all of those.
By a large margin.
For PvP, I think that, I immediately compared the PvP in WoW to the RVR in Dark Age of Camelot.
Uh-huh.
Like I said, different demographics. If I still kept my Dark Age subscription active and did RVR in Dark Age for a long time while I was doing competitive raiding in WoW. So, I mean, if raiding hadn't captured me, and eventually they built up a better PvP system in WoW once Battlegrounds got fully integrated, but different demographics looking for different things.
Yeah, that's a good point. But when you look at WoW, it had competition. It wasn't just by itself. I mean, you were saying initially that the reason for WoW's success is it had no competition, but it obviously did have competition. So what you're saying is that the design that WoW has become, you're saying, could compete with Dark Age of Camelot, EQ, Final Fantasy XI. The old WoW could compete with and blow away those games, but the current WoW couldn't compete with Rift or with Guild Wars 2 or Sweater.
Right. Not necessarily that all of them were on the level of Lineage or Aeon with that Japanese grind style, but WoW was the first game that you could pick up. When I hit level 60 in vanilla in WoW, I was like, wow, I'm level 60 already, because I was used to Final Fantasy XI and Dark Age,
right.
Where in Dark Age, I think it took me, without getting power leveled, it took forever without, before the expansions and stuff were introduced. It took forever to get level cap. Final Fantasy, I was playing for 3 months before I got to level, 30 twice, because that's when you unlock the advanced classes. So to get to level 30 twice took, 4 or 5 months. It was the first game that you could get level cap in a readily accessible manner compared to all the other games I mentioned, which you couldn't.
And you think that was one of the major contributing things of what made
I believe it
WoW
was
so successful?
The reason is that if I had 4 friends each playing, or 5 friends each playing one of the 4 games I mentioned plus WoW, and I wanted to play with one of them, I would have picked WoW every time because, I'd play for 3 weeks, and with his help, I'm already max level, whereas in the other games, I'd still be 3-4 months in trying to get to max level, not being able to do anything but level.
Yeah,
so
that's a really
I
good
think
point.
the friend influence has a lot of,
Yeah.
word of mouth,
absolutely
and the
agree.
friend influence is huge.
But once again, Darkson, you just about hit what I was thinking. What made the game so great is all those things combined, plus the community at the time. If you were to release WoW today, it's kind of a gamble as to what it would become. I personally believe that it would, easily soar past many games currently, but not to the extent it is now. People are drawn because they've spent so much time into the game. What the problem has become is that people are they're so locked into this game they've spent, a good part of their life on. I honestly believe that most of the subscribers are still old players that don't have any other thing to do, because no other game out there has really touched upon what WoW originally had.
So I'm kind of curious. I know you said you played Rift before. I don't know if any of you play Lotro to max level. I know I haven't, or Rift. But do they have more going on at max level? I just don't know answer that question.
For Rift, it felt like there was more going on, because while you were leveling, you had questing, you had rifting, and then you had the war games, the battlegrounds of sorts. Mm-hmm. Once you hit max level, you added another thing to that, which kind of goes into a subcategory of raiding, but it was Rift raiding, which in essence is much like the classic raiding where you killed the world dragons. It is out in the world, and other factions, if you're on a PvP server, at least at the time, I haven't played it, so they may have changed it, could come in and mess with you. So you have rifting, raiding, and you have the PvP aspect.
So you actually think that that's a correct claim, that Rift has more going on at max level?
Yes. In a short answer, yes.
Okay, our final topic is on what motivates players in WoW. Treehugger from PlusHeal writes, quote, "Getting into a top 100 guild has always been a goal of mine. I have always strived to be the best healer in the raid, so I would want to be with the best. What motivates you for progression in WoW? Is it the sense of accomplishment in downing the next boss? Is it the shiny piece of loot you get? What motivates you to do the boss/class research in order to be a raider?" Again, that's Treehugger from PlusHeal. This is a pretty simple setup, actually. Point blank, what motivates you to be the best in WoW? As a bonus question, for those who aren't motivated by progression, what do you think motivates them to play?
Well, I said this on the show before. I loved it in the past expansion when I'd be standing around in chat when I was jumping back and forth in front of Scryer Bank, and I'd get tells, "Oh my god, you have Sunwell gear." And you'd get that tell like 100 times a day, and it'd be like, "Haha, I have Sunwell gear and you don't."
That still boggles my mind. I can't believe you were that guy.
You never want to be that guy, and Darksend's that guy. My motivation for playing, it's really not even raiding anymore. I'm waiting for Blizz to add a new foundational feature to the game that just blows my mind. And I think they're really pushing on the new age, the new thing to do in WoW with transmog. And that is complete character recustomization. And, they've said many times whenever people would ask them, we want new styles for orcs and humans. And they're like, they tried to do this in the past, and it blew up in their face. I think they're really pushing on it by making each individual race plus gear interchangeable with whatever you want. If they were to implement something, transmog would just have to be a feature of it, to where I can indefinitely change my character polygon count to whatever, and I can make him have a Jay Leno chin or the Conan hairdo, the game would be breathed back into me in terms of life.
So you're saying that there are some people that are motivated not necessarily by progression or the sense of accomplishment for doing PvE or PvP content, but rather motivated by the ability to customize their character. And that is the enjoyment they get out of the game. That's what keeps them going.
Oh, yes, very much so. You look at RP servers, and there are people standing around with just this kick-ass looking gear, but it has terrible stats. Or you look at it from a perspective of, I'm going to dare to say it, titles. I'm sure you guys remember when somebody had a title, it was like, whoa. Now my alt has like 20 titles. What is this?
I remember when we got Kingslayer as one of the first guilds on, not our first, one of the first guilds on the server. That's appropriate. And I was like, yeah, Kingslayer. And then the ICC nerfs started kicking in, and then, everyone had Kingslayer. And I was like, well, screw it. I'm going back to Hand of a Doll.
Yeah, no, I remember when it was my alt. I had more characters on my own account with 10-man 3 Drake Sarth than everyone outside my guild on the entire server combined at one point. I had 3 different characters that were 10-man 3 Drake Sarth on my own account before anyone else on the server killed it.
Well, what really motivated me for progression in WoW was actually the accomplishment of downing the next boss. That was it for me. I could care less about gear. I could care less about anything else other than the accomplishment of checking the box and saying I have downed another boss. That was it for me.
I think that was definitely something that used to drive me. I wouldn't say the rating has changed the way that they've done rating. What I would say is I don't think there's been a boss in Cataclysm as of yet that has replaced the most favorite, toughest fight ever at current content, which was Heroic Memoron. No fight has even got close to that yet. So for me, downing the next boss is just a matter of everybody else picking up their shit because I'm carrying them. LOL.
God, it's like there's 2 Darksends.
Well, if I can get away from being that guy for a sec, the motivation from another part of my motivation is the day 2.0 hit, I created my druid, and with the sole intention of tanking. I had been a warrior tank for the end, like the latter half of vanilla. I had been a warrior tank, and I just the thought of being stuck in prot just aggravated me. And when I started playing my druid, there was so much misinformation and bad-mouthing of druids through the beginning of Burning Crusade that I wanted to prove people wrong and say, I am a main tank, and I have main tanked every single fight except for the fights that specifically need other classes to main tank, like Illidan. I main tanked every single fight in Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King, and now Cataclysm that did not require a specific warrior tank because of specific mechanics. And it was that sense of accomplishment saying, look at this, druids can do it, and proving to the community that druids were a viable class. That gave me so much satisfaction knowing that I was able to do that for the community, saying, you know what, you were wrong about us.
Yeah, I guess you're right. When I was in Ice Crown, I was saying that Disc Priest could be tank healers, and I actually did tank heal every single fight, every single heroic fight, and with the exception of Heroic Lich King, because why? But every other fight, I tank healed as Disc effectively, and that was a sense of accomplishment for me to be able to say that and say, hey, you can tank heal as Disc, even in Wrath when it was definitely not considered viable at all.
I think kind of as my closing point on this, the motivation for playing, what is actually keeping me going right now, much like what I said with a new game-changing feature being added, is I really want them to bring back that feel of what you two just said, where classes that don't have the theoretical best capability still have the player that playing them still has the capability of being amazing with that class. You really don't see that in Cataclysm so far.
Well, that's all the time we have for this edition. You've been listening to Forum Junkies with your guest host, Huck.
Hey.
Darksend.
Yankee Game Time.
And, of course, yours truly, Spiritus. Remember to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. And as we will every week, we end our webcast with a segment we like to call Cool Story, Bro.
The best is soon you enter the dungeon. The tank pull, no question asked, and you still in DPS spec. Or, the healer has not finished to load in the dungeon, and the tank has 3 stacks of mobs on him. Then the tank blame everyone and leave. LOL. Fungvi, MMO champion.